Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, you and I sit together in stillness. The day can rest now, its weight slipping away like mist over a quiet field. Here, by this calm fire, you are safe. You are warm. You are held by the hush of night. And before your eyes grow heavy, before sleep begins to find you, let me gently remind you, if these calm journeys bring you rest, if they soothe you in the long hours of night, remember to like this video and subscribe. It helps us keep these stories alive, helps us keep this little circle of peace burning like a steady flame. And tell me, where are you listening from? Are you curled beneath blankets, a fan humming softly beside you? Or lying in a distant hotel bed, carrying the weight of travel in your bones? Or maybe sitting in a quiet chair, the glow of your screen low, letting your breath already slow. Wherever you are, I'd love to know. Leave me a comment and share your moment with me. Now, think of this. Today, when we speak of matchmaking, we think of dating apps glowing in the palm of our hands. Swipe left, swipe right. Little pictures, little words. Some matches for love, some for comfort, some for survival in their own way. But 1,000 years ago, in medieval England, matchmaking looked very different. It was not about chemistry, not about charm, not about two hearts choosing freely. It was about land, inheritance, alliances, survival. Marriage was a contract, written not only in vows but in power itself. And tonight, we will drift into that world. A world where families bargained futures, where children were promised before they grew tall, where the church weighed in on who could love whom, where kings sealed treaties not with ink, but with weddings. So now, soften your shoulders, loosen your breath, let the quiet hum around you, the steady fan, the low crackle of imagined fire. And as the world outside fades, we step gently into the past, into medieval England, where matchmaking was more than love. It was power written in vows. The hall of medieval England was never just a place of hearth and table. It was a marketplace of futures, a stage where marriages were not born of affection alone, but of strategy. To live in that time was to live within a web of family, land, and duty. Marriage was not only about two hearts joining, it was about two houses binding together. Every vow spoken beneath the gaze of priest and kin carried with it more than sentiment. It carried property, inheritance, the survival of lineages. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself as a young man in that world. You may feel the quick stirrings of affection for someone at the harvest fair. You may notice the soft smile of a girl in the fields, her hands stained with grain. But your parents would see beyond the blush of cheeks. They would ask instead, whose daughter is she? What land comes with her? What alliances might be forged through her hand? For in medieval England, marriage was the strongest tool of power. A knight's sword could seize land, but a wedding vow could secure it forever. A war could win a castle, but a betrothal could ensure it would never be lost. Love was fragile. Property was enduring. Imagine now a young woman. Perhaps she dreams of poetry, of courtly songs sung beneath her window. But her family measures her worth in dowry, in the cattle or silver she will bring to her husband's home. Her hand is a key, unlocking alliances, securing borders, planting heirs in fertile ground. Every marriage was a negotiation. Every match a careful balance. Wealth, bloodline, faith, and survival weighed against each other like scales. To marry poorly was not only shameful, it was dangerous. For a bad alliance could weaken a family, could fracture estates, could invite ruin. And yet, even within such constraints, tenderness sometimes bloomed. A bride and groom might grow fond, even gentle. But affection was a byproduct, never the first intention. This was the truth of matchmaking in medieval England. A truth that shaped kings and peasants alike. From the grandest royal marriage, sealed with crowns and treaties, to the simplest village union, whispered at the edge of a churchyard. Marriage was less about hearts, and more about hands joined for survival. So tonight, as you drift deeper into this story, remember that every vow carried weight, not only of promise, but of land, of law, of power itself. And from this understanding, we move into the next step of this world, where children, not yet grown, not yet free to choose, were bound by promises made long before they understood their meaning. The story of marriage in medieval England often began not with love, not with choice, but with a promise made long before children were grown. Close your eyes and picture it. A manor house in the countryside. The smell of bread baking, smoke drifting from the hearth. In the corner, a girl plays with a wooden doll. Her laughter soft, her cheeks still round with childhood. Across the hall, her father sits at a table. A parchment before him, a quill in his hand. He is not writing her a bedtime story. He is signing her future. For in those days, betrothals were arranged when children were young. Sometimes no older than 7, or even younger. The promise was binding. A contract between families. The child herself had little voice in it. Her future was decided by hands older, wiser, and often more calculating. A boy, too. Perhaps only 10, still learning to ride a pony, still chasing dogs in the yard, He may be told that one day he will wed a girl he has never met, that her dowry of land will one day be his, that their union will bind his house to hers. He does not yet know what marriage means. And yet, his life is already shaped by it. For families saw children as threads in a larger tapestry. Every union wove wealth into wealth, land into land, title into title. It was not about affection. It was about survival, ambition, strategy. Imagine the whispering negotiations. One lord speaking to another across a table, cups of ale between them. My son is 7. Your daughter is 6. Let us bind them now, so our fields join together in 20 years' time. Hands clasp, promises sealed. The children continue playing, unaware that their lives have just been bound by ink and oath. There was tenderness sometimes. Parents hoped their children might grow fond of one another. But fondness was never required. The marriage was already written. And once betrothed, the children's paths narrowed. The girl's dowry carefully guarded. Her behavior watched, her virtue protected, for her value was tied to her purity. The boy groomed for responsibility. Taught to ride, to read, to command. For one day, he must rule not only his land, but hers. This was the weight of childhood promises. Promises spoken not by the children, but over them. Promises that bound them to futures they did not yet understand. Close your eyes now. Imagine being that child. Hearing the murmur of adults above you. Catching only fragments of words. Alliance. Land. Dowry. Heir. The words sound heavy, too heavy for your small shoulders. And yet, they settle upon you like stones. For in medieval England, love might come later, but duty came first. And childhood itself was often the opening chapter of a story already written. In medieval England, marriage was rarely just a private bond. It was a matter of family, of lineage, of survival across generations. And so, when a match was to be made, it was not only two people deciding. It was families, parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, sometimes even entire villages watching. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. A great wooden hall. Torches flickering against the beams. A table set not for feasting, but for talk. On it, parchment, quills, coins laid out in small piles, and perhaps even a small chest of silver. At one end, the father of a young bride-to-be. His cloak heavy with fur, his hands clasped tight. At the other, the kin of a groom. Voices low, faces serious, eyes sharp with calculation. The discussion begins. Not with laughter, not with poetry, but with questions. How much land will she bring? What titles come with his name? Are the fields fertile? Are the tenants loyal? Are the borders safe? Every question is a weighing of future power. Every answer carries years of consequence. A single acre promised today could mean wealth for generations. A single refusal could mean rivalry, even feud. Sometimes, these negotiations lasted hours. Sometimes, days. Each side testing the other, pressing for advantage. Perhaps the bride's family promises more than they wish to give. Perhaps the groom's family offers less than expected. The air thick with tension, each word carefully chosen. And always, the children's futures hang in the balance. The boy, perhaps just entering his teens, may be told only after the bargain is done. The girl, her hair still in braids, may overhear whispers outside the door, not knowing yet what they mean. Their voices seldom invited. Their choices seldom heard. But for the parents, this was not cruelty. It was survival. A daughter was a key, a son a doorway. Through them, doors to land, to status, to protection, could be opened. Without careful negotiation, a family might slip downward. With a successful match, they might rise higher than ever dreamed. Imagine the subtle games played at such a table. One man speaks of his son's strength, his training as a knight, his promise of valor in battle. The other nods politely, but counters with mention of his daughter's dowry, a flock of sheep, a strip of farmland, a chest of coin. The words are not only facts. They are moves upon a board. Each statement, each silence, like a piece of chess carefully advanced. And always, the church lingered in the background. For no matter what bargains were made, the match could not be sealed without blessing. Families knew this. And so, as they bargained, they weighed not only land and gold, but whether the union would satisfy the law of the church. Would the priest approve? Would the bishop grant permission? Negotiations were not always peaceful. Voices could rise. Tempers could flare. One father storming from the hall. Another swearing he would find a better match for his child elsewhere. But often, after days of talk, after nights of reflection, bargains were struck. A dowry promised. A parcel of land written into parchment. An oath of alliance spoken aloud, witnessed by kin. And with that, the children's futures shifted. Sometimes the families celebrated with a quiet cup of ale. Sometimes they sealed the promise with gifts. Rings, tokens, or even a symbolic exchange of livestock. Other times, the agreement was written. Signed, sealed with wax, stored in chests that would outlast generations. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Picture those parents. Seated in torchlight, their faces lined with care. They do not speak of love, of passion, of laughter. They speak of fields, of inheritance, of alliances. For to them, love is uncertain, fleeting, but property is lasting. And alliances can mean the difference between ruin and survival. And so, marriage was not only a joining of hearts, but of houses. Not only a promise between two young people, but a contract between two lineages. A negotiation that rippled outward across time, shaping lives not yet born. And when the ink dried, when hands clasped in final agreement, the children's path was set, and there was no turning back. This was matchmaking in medieval England. Not a dance of romance, but a ledger of power. A negotiation where every word mattered, and every silence carried weight. And from here, from these bargains struck in torchlight, the church would step forward, not as a quiet witness, but as the final authority. For without its blessing, no union, no matter how carefully arranged, could stand. The families had bargained. The dowries weighed. The land measured. The promises sealed in whispered oaths. But still, the match was not complete. For in medieval England, no marriage could truly stand until the church gave its blessing. The church was not a distant shadow. It was the beating heart of daily life. Its bells called peasants to prayer. Its priests stood at the cradle, at the marriage, at the grave. Every vow, every passage of life, passed through its hands. Close your eyes and imagine the stone church. A small one, perhaps, in a village. Its walls thick, its windows narrow, its candles flickering in the dim. Or a great cathedral. Spires reaching upward, bells tolling across fields and rivers. Within, the air smells of wax and incense. The silence heavy, the light softened by colored glass. It is here that vows are spoken. And it is here that the church decides which unions may be blessed, and which must be forbidden. Marriage was more than a social bond. It was a sacrament, a holy act, a ritual of eternal weight. The priest stood not only as witness, but as gatekeeper. Without his blessing, the match was invalid. A union in sin. The church carried rules. Some rooted in scripture. Some shaped by power. A man and woman too closely related could not marry. Even distant kin, counted carefully across generations, were barred. Marriages made in secret, without witnesses, risked being annulled. Promises broken could bring shame not only to families, but to souls. And yet, the church also offered shelter. It could protect a young couple who married against their parents' will. If the vows were spoken before God, the union might still stand. It could grant dispensations, bending its own rules for kings, for nobles, for those whose alliances shaped kingdoms. For power and faith, in those days, often walked hand in hand. Close your eyes. Picture the ceremony. The couple stands at the church door, for weddings were often held outside, before witnesses, in the open air. The priest in vestments, his voice steady, intoning the blessings. The bride's hand placed in the groom's. The words spoken slowly, carefully. I take you to be my wedded wife. I take you to be my wedded husband. The vows spoken not only to each other, but to God, to family, to the entire community standing in witness. Rings may be exchanged, or not. Sometimes only words, sometimes tokens. But always, the priest's blessing sealed the act. Without it, the union was incomplete. The church shaped not only the ritual, but the very meaning of marriage. It declared marriage indissoluble, no divorce, no breaking of vows. It made the bond eternal, binding not only bodies but souls. And in this way, it claimed power over families, over dynasties, over kings themselves. Even the mightiest noble, even the king upon his throne, bent beneath the church's authority in marriage. For a union without sanction risked scandal, excommunication, rebellion. A crown could be strengthened by a wedding, but also undone by one forbidden. Imagine the tension, then. Families negotiating land and wealth by firelight. And yet, knowing that in the end, the priest's hand, the bishop's nod, the pope's decree, might decide it all. Marriage was never fully in human hands. It was bound also to heaven. This gave the church immense power. Power over who could marry, over which families rose or fell. Power to sanctify love, or to deny it. And so, in medieval England, every marriage was both a contract and a sacrament, a negotiation of families, and a negotiation with God. Every horn lifted in celebration, every vow spoken in the open air, echoed beneath the bells of the church, and with the church watching, whispering rules, shaping unions, guiding futures. Matchmakers and go-betweens found their role, figures trusted to navigate both families and faith. Men and women who carried secrets between houses, who whispered promises, who sowed the seeds of future vows. The church held authority. The families weighed land and dowries. But between them, there moved quieter figures. Matchmakers, go-betweens, trusted voices who carried secrets across thresholds. Close your eyes and imagine a village lane at dusk. A woman walks slowly, her cloak drawn close. She is not noble, not wealthy, yet all eyes follow her. For she knows things others do not. She knows who has land to give, who has coin to offer, who seeks alliances, who whispers of love in secret. Her words may never be shouted in the hall, but her whispers shape futures. Matchmakers came in many forms. Some were elders, respected for their wisdom. Some were priests, guiding families into unions acceptable to the church. Others were friends of families, trusted to carry messages discreetly. Even servants, moving between manors, could play the role of messenger, their gossip carrying seeds of possibility. Picture the scene. Two families wary of speaking directly, uncertain whether to risk insult or rejection. Instead, they turn to a go-between, a man with careful words, a woman with a gentle smile. She carries the proposal like a secret flame, hidden in her hands. To one family, she says, their son is strong, promising, the land fertile, the tenants loyal. To the other, she murmurs, their daughter is virtuous, well-brought, her dowry secure. She knows what to reveal, what to conceal. She shapes perception, oils the gears of negotiation. These intermediaries often walked fine lines, for to carry a promise was also to carry risk. A careless word could spark offense. A clumsy suggestion could sour relations for years. And so they moved slowly, carefully, choosing each phrase like a step on thin ice. Some go-betweens were subtle artists. They carried not only words, but gifts. A token from one house to another. A brooch, a piece of cloth, a basket of fruit. Each gesture spoke quietly, of wealth, of willingness, of interest. And always, the meaning ran deeper than the object itself. Close your eyes and imagine being such a messenger. You carry in your pouch a folded letter, sealed in wax. The words inside written by a noble hand, but entrusted to you. You walk through narrow lanes, the evening air cool on your skin. Every step a heartbeat of anticipation. You know what this letter could mean. It could secure land, bind families, change lives yet unborn. And yet, it rests lightly in your hand, as though it were nothing at all. Sometimes, matchmakers dealt not only with families, but with hearts. For affection, though secondary, still played its part. Young men sought ways to pass words to the women they admired. A song sung beneath a window. A carved token left at a church door. But often, it was the go-between who ensured these gestures reached safely. Carrying the verse, the ribbon, the whispered promise. Protecting the lovers from scandal, while still feeding the fragile flame of courtship. And then there were secrets. Elopements planned, forbidden matches whispered of, alliances plotted outside the reach of parents. Here, too, the go-between moved unseen. Sometimes risking much, sometimes paid dearly for silence. For a secret union, once revealed, could bring punishment swift and severe. Think of them now. The old woman at the edge of the village, known for her sharp tongue and sharper memory. The steward of a manor, trusted by both lord and lady. The priest, weighing both confession and counsel. The servant, slipping a folded note beneath a cloak. All of them threads in the tapestry of matchmaking. Not the brightest threads, perhaps, but the ones that held the weave together. For without them, families might never approach. Lovers might never meet. Alliances might never be born. The matchmaker was never the one to stand at the altar, never the one whose name was sung. But in the quiet corners, in the whispered words, their presence was always there. Invisible, yet essential. And so, as families bargained, as the church decreed, as children played unaware, the go-between moved silently, carrying futures in the space of a whisper. Now, the whispers give way to numbers, to gifts counted, weighed, measured. For the next step in the ritual of marriage was wealth itself. Dowries and bride prices, where love was weighed not in words, but in silver, in cattle, in acres of land. The whispers of the matchmaker fade. The bargains of the families settle. And now comes the matter of wealth. For in medieval England, marriage was never only a joining of hands. It was also a joining of property. And property had weight. Property had value. Property carried futures within it. This value was expressed in two forms. The dowry, wealth given with the bride, from her family to her husband's. And the bride price, wealth offered by the groom, or his kin, to the bride's family. Close your eyes and imagine a long wooden table. Upon it are spread tokens of fortune. A chest of silver coins, their surfaces glinting in the firelight. Bolts of cloth, rich with color, dyed with costly pigments brought from distant lands. A string of pearls, pale as moonlight, coiled neatly in a wooden box. And beyond these treasures, something more enduring. The promise of land. Acres of fertile soil, fields heavy with grain, orchards heavy with fruit. The dowry was not a gift of affection. It was a guarantee. A pledge that the bride came with substance, with weight, with value that could strengthen her new household. It protected her, too. For if her husband died, the dowry might ensure her survival, granting her means to support herself or her children. For wealthy families, dowries could be immense. Great tracts of farmland, castles, entire villages promised as part of a marriage bargain. For humbler families, the dowry might be a cow, a bed, a chest of linens, a few coins saved over years. But whether grand or modest, it mattered. It shaped how desirable a bride was seen. It decided whether her hand would be eagerly sought or quietly overlooked. The bride price, too, carried weight. It showed the groom's seriousness, his ability to provide. It honored the family that had raised the bride, compensating them for the loss of her labor, her presence, her future children. In some places, it was silver or gold. In others, livestock, tools, or even promises of service. Imagine the conversations. A father of the groom, leaning forward, his voice firm. "My son will bring 10 head of cattle, and 2 acres of meadow." The bride's kin reply. She must carry at least 2 chests of coin, and her dowry land must border ours. The words rise and fall, measured, cautious. Each side pressing, each side conceding, until a balance is struck. And always, the weight of the future hangs above them. For these exchanges were not only for today. They determined tomorrow. A marriage without dowry risked leaving children in poverty. A marriage without bride price risked dishonor, insult, the sense of a woman undervalued. Even the poorest peasants felt this weight. A village girl, her dowry nothing more than a blanket, a chicken, a small patch of land tilled by her mother. Even that small offering mattered. It marked her as prepared for marriage, ready to join her life to another's. Close your eyes. Picture the moment when treasures were displayed. A chest opened. Coins gleaming in torchlight. A cow led into the yard, its hide shining in the morning sun. A bolt of cloth unrolled, its colors rare, its threads shimmering. Each item laid bare before all. Not for vanity, but for proof. Proof of wealth, proof of security, proof of a family's honor. This was not love in flowers. Not romance in poetry. It was love written in silver, in land, in livestock. It was security measured in things that endured. And yet, beneath all the weight of property, affection sometimes found a place. For a groom might slip a personal token into the exchange. A carved brooch, a ribbon, a song sung softly. Small gestures layered atop the larger bargains. Quiet signs that even within the machinery of wealth, there was still room for the heart. But in truth, the dowry and the bride price carried more than romance ever could. They carried power. They bound families together in ties of obligation. They shifted wealth from one house to another. They shaped inheritance, land, dynasties. Without them, a marriage might falter before it began. With them, it could rise into something greater than 2 lives joined. It could become an alliance, a fortress, a legacy. And so, the dowry was gathered. The bride price weighed. The bargains sealed in coin, in cattle, in land marked on parchment. And with that, the union was prepared. Not only for peasants and merchants, but for nobles. For kings. For at the highest levels of power, matchmaking was not just survival. It was diplomacy. It was the weaving of nations. And so we turn now to royal matchmaking, where crowns were bound in vows, and kingdoms were carried in the hands of brides and grooms. The dowries of peasants might be counted in cows and coins. The promises of merchants might be weighed in cloth and silver. But for kings, for queens, for nobles whose banners fluttered over castles, marriage was not simply personal. It was the lifeblood of kingdoms. Close your eyes. Picture the great hall of a castle. Its roof vaulted high, banners swaying in the draught of torches. At the center, not just families, but emissaries. Nobles, bishops, scribes. Men bending over parchment. Whispering of borders, treaties, alliances. And at the center of it all, a bride and groom who may never have spoken more than a word to each other. Yet upon their vows, the fate of nations rested. Royal matchmaking was diplomacy written in flesh and blood. One marriage could seal a truce between warring houses. Another could tie England to distant kingdoms, across seas and mountains. Each union a thread in the vast tapestry of European power. Imagine a king, his council gathered around him. Maps spread upon the table, the flicker of candlelight across parchment lines. They speak not of romance, but of strategy. If my daughter weds the Prince of France, the border will be safe. If my son takes the niece of Castile, new trade may flow across the seas. If we ally with Scotland through marriage, the north may finally rest. Every suggestion a calculation. Every proposal a weapon. And so daughters became emissaries, their hands carrying with them not only dowries of gold and land, but treaties, truces, promises of armies held back. Sons became heirs not only to crowns, but to the alliances bound by their brides. Some of the greatest stories of medieval England unfolded through such matches. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman whose marriages shaped empires. First Queen of France, then Queen of England. Through her, vast lands passed. Kingdoms shifted. Dynasties reshaped. Her hand carried not only love, but power that spanned half of Europe. Or think of Henry VIII, centuries later, whose marriages tore England itself from the church. Though love and desire played their part, beneath them lay dynastic urgency. The need for heirs. The weight of inheritance. The survival of a line. Even his breaking of Rome's authority was, in its root, a matter of marriage and power. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Picture a young princess, leaving her homeland. Her ship creaking as it sails across cold seas. She clutches a small chest of tokens from her family. Her dowry packed into trunks below deck. She knows little of the man she will marry. Perhaps only his name, his title. But she knows her marriage is more than her own. It is her father's treaty, her mother's bargain, her country's hope. Her steps upon English soil are not only hers. They are the steps of an entire realm entering alliance. And think, too, of the groom. a prince waiting in the echoing halls of Westminster or Winchester. Perhaps nervous, perhaps proud, knowing that when he takes her hand, he does not only take a wife. He takes her land, her dowry, her alliances, her family's loyalty. Every kiss, every vow, carries armies behind it. At times, such matches brought peace. Borders softened, wars stilled, trade flourished. At other times, they carried seeds of conflict. If a dowry was disputed, if heirs were contested, if loyalties shifted, the marriage that once promised peace could ignite new wars. Royal matchmaking was never truly private. The eyes of kingdoms watched every step, from the peasants in the fields who hoped for peace, to the bishops who weighed the union against the church's laws, to foreign courts who studied every rumor, every whisper, seeking advantage. Close your eyes once more. Picture the wedding of a royal pair. The church bells tolling, their sound rolling across valleys. The streets lined with villagers, their voices raised in cheer. The bride, cloaked in cloth of gold, her veil heavy with jewels. The groom, armored and crowned, his hand steady. The vows spoken not softly, but before the eyes of thousands. And when they clasp hands, when the priest declares them bound, it is not only two lives joined, it is kingdoms joined. It is borders shifted. It is peace written in vows, or war postponed by rings. This was matchmaking at its highest. Marriage not only as family strategy, but as diplomacy. The most delicate, the most powerful, the most dangerous of tools. And yet, beneath the splendor, the jeweled crowns, the tolling bells, the truth remained the same as in the village hall. Marriage was negotiation. Marriage was survival. Marriage was power. And when kings and queens bound themselves in vows, the ripples spread across generations. Now, from the lofty heights of castles and crowns, let us walk down into the villages, into the fields, the fairs, the hearths of peasants, where matchmaking, though humbler, still bound lives with power. Beyond the stone walls of castles, beyond the banners fluttering in royal courts, life in medieval England unfolded in villages, fields stretching outward, cottages of timber and thatch, smoke rising from hearths, the sound of chickens scratching in the yard. Here, matchmaking was quieter, humbler, yet no less important. For in these villages, too, marriage meant survival. A match could decide who worked which plot of land, who shared labor in the fields, who had the strength of another household at their side in times of famine or storm. Close your eyes and imagine such a village. The lanes are narrow, trodden by bare feet and carts creaking with hay. Children chase dogs. Women draw water from the well. Men bend low in the fields with sickle and plough. And in the midst of this simple life, conversations weave quietly. A mother whispers to another at the well, "My daughter is nearly of age. Strong hands, skilled at spinning. Might your son be seeking a wife?" The words are careful, polite, but filled with purpose. A future is being weighed in those quiet exchanges. Sometimes, matches began at the manor. The lord of the land, though distant, still had a say. Tenants might seek his approval before their children wed. For his lands were divided among families, and their unions could strengthen or weaken his control. A marriage between two households might join their labor, join their rents, bring stability to the manor itself. But often, the heart of village matchmaking lay in the festivals, the harvest fairs, the midsummer dances, the feast days of saints when the churchyard filled with color and sound. Picture it. The stalls lined with bread, cheese, honey, ribbons fluttering in the breeze, music rising from pipes and drums, young men gathering at the edges of the dance, young women passing with baskets, their cheeks flushed in the sun, eyes meeting, glances exchanged. Perhaps a flower slipped into a hand. Perhaps a ribbon tied quietly around a wrist. Small tokens that hinted at future vows. Yet even here, affection was bound to practicality. Parents watched closely, weighing not only smiles, but strength, health, skill. A strong back for the fields. A woman skilled with spindle and hearth. Marriage was not only about attraction. It was about survival in the daily grind of village life. Close your eyes again. Imagine a wedding in such a place. Not the splendor of cathedrals, not the crowns of kings, but a simple churchyard ceremony, witnessed by neighbors and kin. The bride's gown plain, perhaps a borrowed dress of white wool. The groom in his best tunic, washed and mended for the day. The priest's blessing short, his words carried on the wind. And after, laughter. Tables laid with bread, ale, roasted meat if fortune was kind. Dancing in the yard, songs rising into the night, the sound of feet on packed earth. It was not less meaningful than the unions of nobles. It was simply different. Here, the weight of land measured in acres was replaced by strips of field, by chickens and pigs, by a patch of barley. But the purpose was the same: to bind families together, to strengthen households, to ensure survival in the face of a hard world. And yet, tenderness still bloomed in these villages. The laughter of a young couple walking together to the fields. The quiet gift of a carved wooden spoon. The hand held a little longer at the festival dance. Love was not absent, even if it was not the first consideration. It simply grew in the cracks between duty and necessity. So whether in castle or in cottage, whether sealed by treaties or whispered at a well, marriage remained the same force. A shaping of destiny. a weaving of lives. And from the fields of peasants and fairs of villages, we turn now to the rituals of courtship. Those small gestures of affection, tokens of hope, songs of longing, that softened the edges of negotiation. The bargains were struck, the dowries promised, the families aligned. And yet, within all this weight of duty, there still flickered something softer. The quiet stirrings of courtship. For even in medieval England, where love was not the first foundation of marriage, affection still sought its place. Whispers of the heart still moved quietly beneath the louder voices of land and lineage. Close your eyes and picture a young man. He has been told whom he will marry, yet his heart stirs when he sees her. Perhaps at the village fair, as she bends to choose apples at a stall. Perhaps at the church door, her veil brushed by the morning light. Perhaps in the manor yard, her laughter ringing as she carries water from the well. His duty is fixed, but still, he longs to show her something of himself. So he seeks a token, a ribbon dyed red with plant pigments, carefully folded, a wooden brooch carved clumsily with his own hand, a sprig of rosemary cut fresh from the garden, carrying the scent of memory and blessing. These gifts were simple, but they carried meaning. To give such a token was to speak without words. I see you. I choose you. Even if choice was not truly mine. And the girl. She too might offer a token. A small piece of embroidery, her stitches neat, her care visible in every thread. A kerchief, perhaps, edged with her own design. A song sung softly at a festival, her voice trembling but true. Such gestures, though small, wove themselves into the larger fabric of duty. They softened the bargain. They humanized the contract. Courtship, in its quiet way, was both rebellion and surrender. Rebellion, because it allowed room for feeling in a world where marriages were arranged. Surrender, because it still moved within the boundaries of duty. Never stepping too far, lest scandal arise. Close your eyes. Picture the midsummer dance in the village square. The fire crackles high, sparks rising into the warm night. The music swells from pipes and drums, the rhythm steady, irresistible. Young men and women circle, their steps measured, their hands brushing lightly. In that brush, in that fleeting touch, entire conversations unfold without words. A look, a smile, the tilt of a hand. Enough to stir the heart, yet discreet enough to satisfy the watchful eyes of parents. In noble courts, too, gestures carried weight. A knight might compose a verse for his lady. A troubadour might sing beneath her window, though the words cloaked in allegory. A noblewoman might send a token embroidered with her colors, her family's crest stitched delicately into the cloth. Such signs were dangerous, for affection could never outweigh duty. but they made space for tenderness, even within the walls of strategy. Courtship rituals were often bound by season and festival. At harvest time, gifts of food were exchanged. Apples polished bright, bread baked with care. At Yuletide, sprigs of evergreen carried meaning. Life enduring even in winter's death. At Easter, eggs dyed in color, symbols of fertility and hope. Each gesture quiet, yet layered with significance. And sometimes, courtship was shaped not only by gifts, but by song and story. A man might recite a verse he had learned from a wandering skald. Or a woman might hum a tune as she spun wool, her voice carrying into the air where her suitor worked nearby. Music softened the world. It allowed affection to flow where words of duty were too heavy. But even here, caution lingered. Too bold a gesture risked scandal. Too open a declaration could anger families, threaten negotiations. So courtship was a dance of shadows. A balance between saying enough and never too much. Close your eyes and feel it. A wooden token pressed into your hand, warm from the giver's palm. The faint smell of rosemary lingering in the air. The soft brush of a hand in the circle of a midsummer dance. The murmur of a song, carried on the night wind, meant only for your ears. These were the quiet flames that burned beneath the stone weight of duty. And though marriage was strategy, though love was seldom the first concern, still, these gestures endured. Because humans, even bound by duty, still long to be seen, to be cherished, to feel that within the bargain, within the alliance, there was still a spark of tenderness. Courtship was small, but it mattered. It was the thread of warmth woven into the cloth of necessity. And from these small sparks, sometimes larger fires began. Fires of forbidden matches. For what happened when the church declared two closely related? Or when families forbade a union that hearts still desired? We turn now to forbidden matches, where duty and desire collided, and the church's shadow grew long. Marriage in medieval England was never free. It was bound, tied tightly by family, by duty, and most of all, by the rules of the church. For love might stir quietly in the heart, but not every love could be blessed. Some matches, no matter how deep the feeling, were declared forbidden. Close your eyes and imagine the dim interior of a stone church. Candles burn low, their wax dripping slowly onto iron stands. A priest bends over a thick book, its pages edged in red, its words written in Latin. There, in careful script, are the laws of kinship, the degrees of consanguinity, lines drawn outward like branches of a tree. And through these lines, the church decided who might wed and who must not. The rules were strict. Cousins, even distant ones, often barred from marrying. Unions between in-laws forbidden, as though blood itself flowed through legal bonds. At times, the restrictions reached so far that in small villages, nearly half the possible unions were technically forbidden. And yet, still, families tried. For sometimes the heart did not heed such lines. A boy and girl, raised in the same village, meeting year after year at the harvest fair. Their eyes drawn together, their laughter soft, their bond deepening with each season. But the priest, when asked, shakes his head. They are kin. The church cannot bless it. The law is clear. Yet the longing remains. And among nobles, the rules grew heavier still. For cousins often held the most valuable lands. To marry them would bind estates, join castles, secure borders. But to the church, such unions were dangerous. Blood mingling too closely, sin creeping into the lineage. So kings and lords wrote letters to Rome, begging dispensations. And sometimes, the Pope granted them. But often, he did not. And the marriage that might have secured peace became instead a spark for war. Forbidden matches carried more than heartbreak. They carried punishment. Couples who wed without sanction risked annulment. Their children declared illegitimate, cut off from inheritance. Families who defied the church faced fines, disgrace, even excommunication. The stain could last for generations. Close your eyes again. Picture two young lovers, meeting in secret at the edge of a meadow. The night air cool. The grass wet with dew. Their hands touch, their voices low. They dream of life together. But in the village, their families whisper. And in the church, the priest declares, it cannot be. Their bond, so real to them, erased with a word of law. The pain of forbidden love is timeless. But in medieval England, it carried a weight heavier than most could bear. For to defy the church was not only to risk scandal, it was to risk one's soul. And yet, some still dared. Some risked everything for the bond of their hearts. And so, whispers of elopements began to spread. Secret vows spoken by candlelight. Lovers fleeing into the night, hand in hand. Their stories often ending in scandal. Sometimes in tragedy. But always echoing with the same quiet truth, that even in a world of law and lineage, the human heart still sought its freedom. The laws were strict, the rules of kinship heavy, the bargains of families binding. And yet, the heart, in its quiet way, often slipped through the cracks. For even in medieval England, where land and dowry outweighed affection, love sometimes grew where it was not permitted. And when it did, it often led to the most dangerous of choices: elopement. Close your eyes and imagine two young people. They have been promised elsewhere, to partners chosen by family, by duty, by strategy. But their eyes find each other across the churchyard. Their voices linger in stolen conversation. Their hands brush at the edge of a festival dance. And slowly, a bond takes root. They know their families will not agree. They know the priest will shake his head. But still, the thought grows. What if we chose for ourselves? What if we fled? What if we bound our own lives beyond the reach of family and law? And so, in secret, they plan. A ribbon tucked into a pouch. A token carved in wood. A whispered meeting place, the old oak at the edge of the meadow. The lane that leads toward another town. They carry with them little, for they must travel light, unseen. A loaf of bread, a jug of water, perhaps a coin or two hidden away. And above all, their courage. Picture it now. The night deep, the village silent. The moon hanging low over the fields. The girl slips from her cottage, her breath caught in her throat. She carries nothing but her small chest of keepsakes, and her heart pounding like a drum. The boy waits in the shadows, cloak drawn, his face pale with fear and hope alike. When she joins him, he takes her hand, and together they walk quickly into the night. Their destination might be another village, where a priest, sympathetic or bribed, might bless their vows in secret. Or perhaps a distant town, where they can disappear, begin anew, free from the watchful eyes of kin. Each step away from home feels like a step into both freedom and danger. For the risks were immense. If caught, they could be dragged back in shame. Their union annulled, their names stained. The families dishonored, their alliances broken. Their futures darkened forever. Even worse, they might face punishment, fines, disinheritance, even the threat of excommunication. To elope in medieval England was not a romantic adventure alone. It was a gamble with life, with family, with the soul itself. And yet, the stories persisted. For some lovers, the risk was worth it. The power of choosing for themselves outweighed the weight of tradition. They would rather risk ruin together than safety apart. Not all elopements ended in tragedy. Some succeeded. A priest persuaded, vows spoken quickly at dawn, witnessed only by God. The families, though furious at first, sometimes forced to accept the union. And over time, grudges softened. Life went on. But the whispers remained. The scandal never quite faded. Neighbors remembered. Storytellers repeated. Their names carried always with a touch of daring, of defiance. Close your eyes again. Hear the whispers in the village square. They fled by night, hand in hand. Can you imagine? They say the priest wed them in secret. Her father will never forgive. the scandal grows like fire on dry straw, spreading from cottage to cottage, from manor to manor, and beyond the village, in noble courts, scandals of marriage carried even heavier weight. For if a prince, a nobleman, or a lady of high birth chose for themselves, defied the church, defied the crown, the consequences were not whispers, but wars, heirs declared illegitimate, inheritances disputed, families torn apart, kingdoms shaken. What was private love became public crisis. Think of Abelard and Heloise, a teacher and his brilliant student, drawn together despite every boundary. Their love, passionate and fierce, defied expectation. But scandal followed. Punishment fell. Their lives torn apart by a world that would not allow their bond to stand freely. Their story echoed through the ages, whispered as both caution and inspiration. For in every age, love that defies duty carries both beauty and danger. It is remembered not only for the passion, but for the cost. Elopements and scandals reminded medieval England of a truth both simple and profound: that even in a world bound by rules, the human heart still longed to choose. That beneath the weight of law and lineage, there burned always a spark of rebellion. And so, some chose to flee, some chose to defy, some bore the cost, and some carried their stories into legend. From these dangerous whispers, from these secret vows, we move now to the safer, steadier ground of marriage contracts. Written, sealed, and witnessed, binding families more firmly than love ever could. The whispers of love might stir. The scandals of elopement might spread like fire through a village. But in the end, most marriages in medieval England were not left to chance, or even to affection. They were written down, fixed, bound, in the form of contracts. Close your eyes and imagine the great table of a manor house, the air thick with the smell of burning tallow, the torches flickering along timbered beams. Upon the table lies parchment, pale and stiff, smoothed flat with careful hands. Beside it, a quill cut sharp. A pot of ink, black as night, waiting. Around the table, men sit with fur cloaks drawn close. Women seated nearby, their faces watchful, their voices quiet but firm. Here, the future of two families is written. Not in poetry, not in song, but in clauses, conditions, obligations. The marriage contract was a solemn thing. It listed the dowry in detail. Every coin, every chest of linens, every acre of land promised with the bride. It recorded the bride price, if one was given. The livestock, the silver, the pledges of loyalty that came from the groom's side. It spoke of inheritance. Which children would hold which lands, how titles would pass, what would happen should the husband die before the wife. It spoke of guardianship. Who would protect the widow? Who would raise the children if both parents were lost? Every possibility weighed. Every risk considered. For to marry was to gamble with the future. And the contract was a shield against uncertainty. Close your eyes and hear the scratch of the quill across parchment. Slow, steady strokes, each word carrying years of consequence. The scribe bends low, his lips moving silently as he writes. The ink pools in curves and lines, shaping words in Latin or French, depending on the family station. Each letter more binding than a kiss. Each word heavier than a song. Witnesses stood nearby. Sometimes the local priest. Sometimes lords or elders. For a contract without witnesses was fragile. But one seen, heard, and signed before many could not easily be denied. At the end, the parchment was rolled, tied with cord, and sealed with wax. The seal pressed with a signet ring, the crest of a family, the mark of a lineage. A simple lump of wax became a fortress of obligation. A symbol that words had weight, that promises could not be broken without consequence. For those of noble birth, contracts were even more elaborate. Not only property, but treaties and borders written into them. Entire regions of England changed hands not through war, but through ink. A bride might bring with her castles, villages, rivers, forests. And with a single marriage, the map of a kingdom might shift. But even among peasants, the spirit of contract lingered. If not on parchment, then in spoken oaths witnessed by neighbors. A man might swear before the village that he would provide for his bride. Her father might declare aloud the goods he gave with her. Though less formal, these promises carried weight, for all who heard became enforcers. Community itself became the parchment. Memory the ink. The contract, in whatever form, turned marriage into more than affection. It made it law. It made it binding. It turned two voices into one future that all must recognize. Close your eyes. Picture the moment of sealing. The wax still warm, the seal pressed deep. The ring lifted away, leaving the crest clear and sharp. The families breathe out. The bargain complete. The children's futures no longer uncertain, but written, witnessed, sealed. And yet, the contract was only one half of the ritual. For soon, the private words of ink and wax would give way to the public words of vow and blessing. The community would gather. The bells would toll. The priest would raise his hands. And what was once bargain on parchment would become sacred before God. We turn now to the wedding as public ritual. A ceremony of vows and witnesses, where community itself enforced what had been written. The contract was signed. The wax seal pressed. The bargain fixed between families. But parchment alone was not enough. A marriage had to be more than ink. more than whispers in candlelight. It had to be seen. It had to be spoken. It had to be made real before God and before the eyes of the community. And so, the wedding became a public ritual. A weaving together of law, of faith, of family, of neighbor. A stage upon which two lives were joined, not in secret, but in the bright gaze of all who mattered. Close your eyes and picture the morning of such a day. The church bells toll, their heavy sound rolling across the fields, calling villagers from cottages, drawing nobles from manors. Men put on their best tunics, brushed free of dust. Women smooth the folds of woolen gowns, tie ribbons in their hair. Children run barefoot, laughing, weaving flowers into garlands. All gather. For to witness a marriage was both joy and duty. The bride prepares in her chamber. Her gown simple or splendid, depending on her station. Perhaps plain white wool for a peasant's daughter. Perhaps rich silk, dyed deep crimson or green, edged with embroidery for a noble's child. She wears a veil, a crown of flowers, or, if fortune is great, a circlet of gold. Her hands tremble, though whether with joy or with fear, no one can say. The groom waits outside the church door. His hair combed, his tunic new, or his armor polished if he is of knightly rank. He stands with family at his side, his eyes lifted toward the sky. Around him, neighbors murmur, priests move, friends gather. The air itself heavy with expectation. For weddings in medieval England were not always held inside. Often, they took place at the threshold of the church, before the doors. Symbolic. For marriage, like baptism, began at the boundary of sacred space. The vows spoken before the door, before witnesses, made the union binding. And then, sometimes, the couple stepped inside for mass, for blessing, for celebration. Close your eyes and hear it. The priest's voice rising steady above the crowd. He asks the questions. Do you take this woman? Do you take this man to be your lawful spouse? The answers come soft, but firm. I do. I do. The vows spoken slowly, deliberately, so none can deny they were said. Sometimes a ring is slipped onto the bride's finger. Sometimes only words, only hands clasped. But the gesture matters less than the witness. For in this moment, the community itself becomes the guardian of the vow. Neighbors nod. Family weeps quietly. Children peer wide-eyed. Each person present is not merely guest, but witness. And by their witness, they too are bound. For if ever the vow is broken, they will remember. They will hold the couple accountable. The priest then blesses. His hands lifted high, his words weaving together scripture, law, and hope. He declares them one. And the bells ring again. Louder now, brighter. A sound that echoes across fields, rivers, forests. carrying news of the union far beyond the churchyard. Picture it now. The bride and groom step away from the door. Their hands still clasped, their faces lit by firelight or sunlight. The crowd surges forward, voices rising in cheer. Grain is thrown, flowers scattered. Symbols of fertility, of blessing. The path ahead strewn with petals, their scent rising sweet in the air. This ritual was more than joy. It was enforcement. By making marriage public, it became unbreakable. All who saw, all who heard, became part of its strength. It could not be undone in silence. It could not be denied in secrecy. And yet, within the formality, within the ritual, there was still room for tenderness. The way the groom glanced at the bride as she lowered her veil. The way she squeezed his hand when her voice faltered. The way a child laughed, running forward to scatter flowers at their feet. In those small moments, the heavy machinery of alliance softened, became human, became gentle. Close your eyes once more. Hear the bells, deep and resonant. Feel the press of the crowd. The warmth of the sun or the coolness of a cloudy day. See the bride's veil lifting slightly in the breeze. See the groom's hand trembling as it clasps hers more tightly. And above them all, the voice of the priest, blessing, binding, sealing. This was the wedding. Not only a joining of two lives, but of two families, two lineages, sometimes even two kingdoms. A contract made flesh. A bargain spoken aloud. A vow sanctified by heaven. And once the vows were complete, once the bells had tolled, the solemnity gave way to joy. For now came the feasting, the music, the dancing. Celebration laid over strategy, merriment covering calculation. We stepped next into the glow of that feast. The tables heavy with food, the horns brimming with ale. The songs rising, the dancers stamping, the night alive with cheer. The wedding feast. The vows have been spoken. The priest's blessing lingers in the air like incense. The bells have tolled. Heavy and bright, carrying news of the union to every corner of the parish. And now, the solemnity softens. The weight of parchment and prayer gives way to something lighter. To laughter. To song. To celebration. For no wedding in medieval England was complete without a feast. Close your eyes and imagine the hall. A great wooden space, long tables laid with boards and benches. Torches flicker against dark beams, shadows dancing along the walls. At the head of the hall sits the bride and groom, side by side. Their hands clasped, their faces still pale from the vows. But around them, joy begins to rise. The tables groan with food. Platters of roasted meat, steaming and fragrant. Pies filled with venison or pork, their crusts golden. Loaves of coarse bread stacked high, still warm from the oven. Bowls of butter, yellow and rich. Cheeses cut into wedges. Jugs of ale, horns of mead, cups of wine poured again and again. Music begins. A pipe, sharp and lilting. A drum, steady as a heartbeat. Voices rise in song, some tuneful, some ragged, all full of cheer. Feet stamp against the floor. Hands clap in rhythm. The hall itself seems to breathe with sound and life. This was more than merriment. It was ritual. The feast declared to all, the union is real, the bargain is sealed, the families are joined. Those who ate at the table, those who drank from the horn, became witnesses not only to the vows, but to the joy that followed. Close your eyes again. Picture the bride lifting a cup to her lips. The groom cutting the first slice of bread, offering it to her as symbol of provision. The crowd cheering, laughter spilling over like mead from a brimming horn. Children darting between benches, catching crumbs of bread, chasing one another in the glow of torchlight. Old men leaning back, their faces flushed with drink, telling stories of weddings past. Women smiling, their hands busy with serving, yet their eyes gleaming with pride. And always, the music. Sometimes a slow, stately tune for the noble guests to watch. Sometimes a wild reel for the younger folk, who danced until sweat glistened on their brows. The circle of dancers swelling and shrinking, hands clasped, voices lifted. Every turn of the dance another reminder that life was still sweet. In noble halls, the feasting could last for days. Tables replenished again and again. Roasted swans carried in, their feathers gilded for display. Peacocks dressed in their own brilliant plumage. Wines poured from distant lands. Minstrels sang ballads of love and loyalty. Jugglers and acrobats performed between courses. Each dish, each song, each performance another layer of splendor, another display of wealth and power. But even in villages, the feasts held meaning. The food may have been humbler, stews, coarse bread, ale brewed in cottage kitchens. But the joy was no less. For to feast together was to honor the couple, to bind the community, to remind all that life held sweetness even in hardship. Feasting also carried symbolism. The sharing of bread and meat echoed the sharing of life. The raising of cups signified unity, loyalty, and blessing. Even the laughter was ritual. For joy itself was a kind of offering, ensuring that the new marriage began in warmth, not sorrow. Close your eyes once more. Imagine the sound of it. The crackle of fire, the murmur of voices, the sudden burst of laughter. The clink of cups, the thud of platters upon tables, the music weaving through it all. Imagine the smell. Roasted meat, spiced pies, sweet honey dripping into bowls. Imagine the sight. The bride's cheeks glowing with warmth, the groom's shoulders finally easing, the guests leaning close in conversation. It is not only a feast. It is a tapestry of senses. A night to be remembered for years. And beneath the joy, the purpose remains. This is not only merriment. It is declaration that two families are joined, that the community itself has witnessed and approved, that from this day forward, the couple belongs not only to each other, but to all. The feast carries on. Late into the night, voices grow softer, slurred. Children fall asleep upon benches. The bride and groom slip away quietly, their absence noticed but unspoken. And still, the tables hum with life. The music rises once more. The torches burn low, yet steady. This is the celebration. The moment when burden becomes joy. When strategy becomes song. When vows, heavy with power, are softened by laughter, by food, by drink. And as the feast fades, the night gives way to quiet again. The couple begins the true weaving of their lives, where love, if it comes, will grow not before marriage, but after. We turn now to that quiet truth, love after marriage, where affection, often absent at first, found its place slowly, patiently. The feast grows quiet. The torches burn low. The last songs fade into the smoky rafters. And in the hush that follows, the true marriage begins. For in medieval England, love was rarely the reason for marriage. But that did not mean love was absent. Often, it came later. Not like a fire that blazed suddenly, but like a flame that caught slowly, built patiently, endured quietly. Close your eyes and imagine a young couple. They sit together in a chamber lit by a single candle. The bride, her hair braided, her gown folded neatly about her knees. The groom, weary from the day, his hands rough with the callous of labor or the weight of sword. At first, they are strangers, bound by contract, bound by vow, but not yet bound by affection. And yet, time works gently. Days spent together, meals shared, prayers spoken side by side. The rhythm of life begins to draw them closer. She learns the sound of his voice when he laughs. He learns the way her hands move when she spins wool, steady, graceful. He notices her quiet patience. She notices his strength, not only of body but of resolve. And slowly, something tender begins to root. Love after marriage was not passion shouted in poetry. It was care. It was the way a husband shared bread with his wife when food was scarce. It was the way a wife kept her husband's cloak mended, so he did not shiver in winter's wind. It was the look exchanged across a crowded hall, small and fleeting, yet filled with understanding. These gestures, repeated again and again, wove a bond stronger than fleeting desire. In noble households, Affection sometimes surprised those who expected only duty. A king, bound to a queen for politics, might discover comfort in her counsel. A noblewoman, married to secure borders, might come to trust her husband's loyalty and steadiness. Even among those who began as strangers, affection sometimes bloomed into quiet companionship. And for peasants, too, love grew in daily labor, in planting fields together, in raising children side by side, in tending animals, in sharing laughter at the harvest, in weeping together when storms ruined the crop. Marriage became the shared carrying of burdens. And through that burden, tenderness grew. Close your eyes again. Picture the hearth of a small cottage. The fire crackles softly, casting golden light on rough wooden walls. The couple sits together, their children asleep on straw pallets nearby. They do not speak much. They do not need to. The comfort is in the silence, in the warmth of being near, in the knowledge that they face the world together. This was love after marriage. Not a love chosen freely, not a love sung in troubadour ballads, but a love that grew steady with time. A love that valued stability above passion. For in a world where winters were harsh, where famine and plague loomed, where war might come at any time, it was not the fire of desire that ensured survival. It was the quiet, steady flame of loyalty, companionship, and endurance. And yet, not all marriages grew warm. Some remained cold, distant, strained. But even then, duty held them together. For vows could not be broken easily. The church forbade divorce, and families would not allow disgrace. So even without affection, many endured. Stability prized above joy. Order above rebellion. But when love did bloom, when husband and wife grew fond, even tender, it was remembered with gratitude. For in such a world, to find affection within duty was a blessing as rare as it was precious. And so, as the years passed, some couples grew not only households, but hearts bound in trust and care. A love not born in fire, but in patience. And yet, life in medieval England was never still. Death came early, often sudden. And when a husband or wife was lost, the path of love and duty began again. For widows and widowers carried a special place, and their second marriages could hold even more power than the first. We turn now to widows and second matches, where grief, freedom, and strategy intertwined. The story of marriage in medieval England was never a single chapter. It was often written twice, sometimes 3 times. For life was fragile. Illness, childbirth, war, hunger, all claimed lives too soon. And when death came, it left behind not only grief, but decisions. Close your eyes and imagine a woman standing at the threshold of her cottage. Her husband gone, the fields silent. She pulls her cloak tighter, the wind cold upon her cheeks. Her children cling at her side, their eyes wide, their future uncertain. In that moment, she is no longer only wife. She is widow. And with widowhood came both burden and power. In medieval England, widows carried a unique position. For the first time, some women found themselves with a measure of independence. If her dowry had been secured in the marriage contract, a widow could claim it back. She might control land in her own right, administer her husband's estate until her sons came of age. She could even, at times, refuse remarriage, choosing instead to live by her own household, her own means. In a world where women were often bound by fathers and husbands, widowhood could be both shadow and light. Yet widows were also sought after. For their hands carried property, their names carried alliances. A noble widow, young and wealthy, could shape the fate of entire lineages by her second choice. Even a village widow might be courted quickly, for her labor and her small land could strengthen another man's household. To marry a widow was not scandal. It was strategy. Close your eyes again. Picture a noble hall, its banners swaying in the dim light. At its center sits a widow of rank, veiled in black, her face pale but proud. Around her, suitors whisper. Families weigh possibilities. Her first marriage had tied one house to another. Her second could shift the balance once more. And though grief lingers, the world waits for her choice. Sometimes, second marriages were arranged swiftly. A young widow, her dowry restored, might be married within months to secure her property. Other times, widows delayed, choosing carefully. For unlike young maidens, they knew the weight of vows. They had lived the duties, borne the burdens. They entered their second unions with eyes wide, often with greater say in the choice. For widowers, too, remarriage was common. A man left with children, fields, estates, needed a partner to manage the household, to raise heirs, to hold the hearth together. And so, many widowers sought new wives quickly. Sometimes younger brides, to bear more children. Sometimes widows themselves, seasoned in the running of a home. Each second union another stitch in the fabric of survival. And yet, beyond duty, beyond necessity, sometimes affection found its way into these second matches. For those who had endured loss, companionship was precious. A second marriage might bring not only alliance, but comfort. The warmth of not facing winters alone. The strength of a hand steady beside one's own. Close your eyes and imagine the quiet of such a union. A man and woman, both touched by grief, both softened by years. They sit together in the glow of a small fire, children sleeping nearby. They speak little, for words are not always needed. In their silence, there is understanding. In their shared burdens, there is tenderness. It may not be passion, but it is love of another kind. Widows, in particular, sometimes gained a measure of voice denied them in youth. As maidens, their futures were decided by parents, by fathers, by brothers. As wives, they were bound by their husband's will. But as widows, they sometimes chose for themselves whether to remain single, whether to remarry, whether to step into the cloister and devote their days to prayer. For widowhood was a threshold between duty endured and choices reclaimed. Of course, not all widows were free. Some were pressured by families eager to reforge alliances. Some were forced to remarry quickly to secure their dowry within kin. But even in such cases, their presence carried weight. For their name, their land, their womb, all remained vessels of power. Second marriages shaped dynasties. A widow of noble birth might remarry into another house, merging two great estates. A widower of influence might wed a wealthy widow, doubling his lands. Even kings remarried, binding themselves again to new queens, ensuring heirs, reshaping alliances across kingdoms. Thus, widowhood was both sorrow and strategy, both shadow of loss and doorway to renewal. It reminded all in medieval England that marriage was not only for the young, not only for first vows. It was a cycle, repeated, reshaped, rewritten, as life demanded. And so, widows and widowers stepped again into vows. Some for survival, some for power, some for comfort. Each union another turning of the wheel. From here, from the ashes of loss and the dawn of new unions, we turn to another thread. Inheritance. For marriages did not only bind two lives, they decided the fate of generations. Children were not only blessings, they were heirs. And so we move now to marriage and inheritance, where vows shaped dynasties, where the future of kingdoms rested in the small hands of children. The vows were spoken, the feast enjoyed, the household settled. But in truth, the true weight of marriage in medieval England was not measured on the wedding day. It was measured in years, in seasons, in the children born from the union. For marriage was not only about two people living together. It was about the continuation of lineage. It was about heirs. Close your eyes and imagine a manor at dawn. The fields stretch wide, the air damp with mist. Inside, in the bedchamber, a woman lies weary, her newborn child wrapped in linen beside her. The midwife whispers softly. The baby's cry echoes through the chamber. A son, or perhaps a daughter. And with that first breath, the meaning of the marriage shifts. Children were not only blessings, they were proof that the union was fruitful, that the line would endure. A son meant an heir, a name carried forward, land secured, titles preserved. A daughter meant a future alliance. Another marriage to be bargained, another dowry to be weighed. Each child a piece upon the board of inheritance. But with inheritance came disputes. For land was precious, titles coveted. And where there was more than one child, or where vows were unclear, conflicts often followed. Imagine a nobleman with 3 sons. The eldest is heir by custom, but the younger sons still expect provision. How will the lands be divided? Which estates will remain intact, which will fragment? Families debated, argued, sometimes fought bitterly. For inheritance was not only about property, it was about power. And what if a marriage produced no children? Then anxiety grew heavy. Whispers filled the hall. Is she barren? Is he cursed? Families grew restless, alliances weakened. For without heirs, land could pass to distant kin, or even be seized by rival houses. The marriage, once celebrated, became shadowed with doubt. Close your eyes. Picture the weight on a young bride. Her body expected to carry not only children, but the future of estates. Her value measured not only in dowry, but in her ability to give heirs. The pressure silent, but constant. Each passing year without a child heavy with judgment. And picture the husband. If heirs failed to come, he too bore whispers. Perhaps he was weak, perhaps cursed. Or perhaps the union was simply not blessed. Some sought annulment, turning to the church, claiming the marriage invalid, seeking another chance for heirs. Others endured, clinging to faith, to hope, to the possibility of legacy. Among peasants, inheritance mattered too. Though humbler, the disputes were no less fierce. A strip of land, a small herd of animals, even the tools of a father's trade. All were passed from parent to child. And when children argued, when claims overlapped, the peace of the village could shatter. In noble houses, inheritance shaped kingdoms. Think of dynasties rising and falling upon the survival of one fragile child. A prince dying young could throw the realm into war. A disputed claim between cousins could spark battles that consumed entire regions. The Wars of the Roses, centuries later, were born of such disputes. Marriages and heirs tangled together until blood ran through England's fields. Close your eyes again. Picture a great hall, filled with lords and banners. At the center, a boy barely 10 years old, seated in a high chair. He is heir to vast lands, though still a child. Around him, uncles whisper, cousins plot, servants bow. His very existence shapes the fate of thousands. All because of a marriage vow spoken years before he was born. This was the weight of inheritance. Marriage was never only about 2 people. It was about the children they would bring forth. Children who were not only loved, but counted, weighed, measured, children who were not only sons and daughters, but heirs, symbols, living promises of alliances. And when those heirs quarreled, when claims were unclear, when death came too soon, the peace of families fractured, the peace of kingdoms shattered. For marriage, in its most lasting form, was not written in parchment. It was written in blood. And yet, behind all the weight of inheritance, there was still tenderness. Parents watching their children grow, laughing in the courtyard, running through fields. The joy of hearing a baby's first cry. The relief of seeing a son grow strong, a daughter thrive. For even as children were heirs, they were also beloved. And in that love, marriages sometimes softened, became more than duty, more than strategy. From inheritance, we move to memory. For even as centuries passed, even as customs shifted, the echoes of these medieval matchmakings lingered. We turn now to echoes of medieval matchmaking, where old traditions, forged in duty and power, carried forward into later ages. The vows were spoken. The heirs were born. The lands divided. Generations passed, yet the patterns of matchmaking in medieval England did not fade. They lingered, echoing softly through time. Close your eyes and imagine England not in the 12th century, but in the 16th, the 17th, even the 18th. The world had changed. Castles gave way to manors of stone and brick. Fields stretched beneath the watch of new lords. The Reformation shook the church. Kings broke from Rome. And yet, when it came to marriage, much remained familiar. Families still weighed wealth before affection. Dowries still carried weight, whether in land, coin, or livestock. Bride prices softened but never vanished. And always, the union of two lives still meant the binding of two families. In noble courts, marriage remained politics. Dynasties arranged unions across Europe. Queens carried dowries that reshaped maps. Princes wed brides from far-off lands to secure peace, just as their ancestors had done centuries before. Among the gentry and merchants, too, echoes lingered. Marriage contracts still signed. Property still exchanged. Young men still warned not to marry beneath themselves. Young women still measured by dowry, inheritance, and the alliances they could bring. Even in villages, long after medieval times, parents whispered at the well, "My daughter is nearly of age. She brings with her a good field of barley. My son is ready. He can provide a cottage." The details changed, the clothing changed, the language softened. But the rhythm was the same. Marriage as bargain, as survival, as weaving of community. Close your eyes and think of traditions that linger still today. The giving of rings. Once simple tokens, now polished with diamonds. The public witnessing of vows. Once outside church doors, now within sanctuaries or gardens. The feast after. Once bread and ale in smoky halls, now banquets with wine and cake. We carry the echoes, even when we do not hear them. And beyond custom, the very language of inheritance endured. Property passing through children. Disputes among heirs. Even now, wills and contracts echo the marriage bargains of old. The weight of who marries whom still shaping families, fortunes, futures. And in stories, the echoes became legend. The troubadours who once sang of courtly love gave way to poets, playwrights, novelists. Think of Shakespeare. His plays filled with marriages, arranged and defied. Daughters pressured by fathers. Lovers fleeing into the night. Secret vows spoken beneath moonlight. Every drama upon the stage a reflection of patterns first carved in medieval halls. Close your eyes once more. Hear the bells of a wedding today. Feel the weight of tradition in the white gown, the walk down the aisle, the vows spoken before a gathered crowd. Do you feel it? The faint echo of medieval England, whispering still. That marriage is not only love. It is contract, community, survival. The world has shifted, but the roots remain. Every bouquet thrown, every toast made, every gathering of witnesses around bride and groom. All carry faint shadows of long-ago rituals, forged when vows were power. And now, as the echoes fade, as the centuries drift away like mist, we arrive at the final reflection. To gather all the threads together. To breathe once more the truth of medieval matchmaking. And then, gently, to lay it down. The story quiets now. The feasts fade. The songs dim. The candles burn low. And all that remains is the echo of vows. For in medieval England, matchmaking was never simply about love. It was about land, about lineage, about survival itself. Every whisper at a well, every bargain in a hall, every vow spoken before a priest, carried weight beyond two hearts. It carried the fate of families, of villages, of kingdoms. Close your eyes and let the story drift back through you. We began with childhood promises. Children scarcely grown, promised to futures they could not yet imagine. We watched families bargain across tables, weighing wealth, titles, and honor more carefully than affection. We saw the church step forward, blessing, forbidding, shaping unions with its rules. We followed matchmakers and go-betweens, carrying futures in whispers, in folded notes, in careful smiles. We saw dowries laid out on wooden tables, bride prices measured in coin and cattle. We walked into royal courts, where vows carried kingdoms on their shoulders. and then into villages, where matches were humbler, yet still vital for survival. We lingered with tokens of courtship. Ribbons, flowers, songs sung quietly in the night. We felt the weight of forbidden matches, the pain of love denied by law, by kin, by the church's stern hand. We fled with eloping lovers, running by moonlight, risking all for freedom. And then we returned to parchment, to marriage contracts written in ink, sealed with wax. Promises made eternal, not by love alone, but by law and witness. We stood at the church door, hearing vows spoken in the open air, witnessed by all. We stepped into halls filled with music, feasting, laughter. Joy layered over strategy. We saw love slowly bloom after marriage. Not fiery passion, but patient companionship. We walked with widows and widowers, their grief heavy, their choices reshaping futures in second marriages. We saw children born, heirs who carried the weight of inheritance, dynasties shaped by their fragile lives. And we followed the echoes into centuries beyond, where customs shifted but never vanished. All of it, threads in one tapestry, all of it woven from the same truth, that marriage, in medieval England, was power. A vow was more than words. It was a binding, stronger than iron, sharper than sword. It was strategy, alliance, protection, inheritance. It was families stitched together, villages held steady, kingdoms balanced on rings of gold. And yet, within that power, there were still small flames of tenderness. The quiet gift of rosemary, the carved token left at a doorway, the laughter of a couple growing fond through shared burdens. Love did not always begin the union, but often it found its way inside it. Close your eyes again and breathe slowly. Imagine the sound of a medieval wedding bell, its echo fading across fields and valleys. Imagine the sight of a bride and groom, their hands clasped, their voices trembling as they speak vows older than themselves. Imagine the feast that follows. Music, laughter, children chasing shadows in the firelight. And then, imagine the quiet afterward. The torches dim, the hall empty, the world hushed. Only the vows remain, lingering like smoke in the rafters. And now, centuries later, those vows still echo. In the rings we wear, in the feasts we hold, in the witnesses we gather. Every modern wedding carries faint shadows of medieval matchmaking. The public vow, the feast, the gift, the blessing. Echoes of a time when love was bound to land, when affection bent beneath duty. The night is quiet now. The story has been told. The embers glow low, their light soft against the dark. Rest now. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breath fall slow. The vows of the past can rest now too. Their power spoken, their echoes fading. As you drift deeper into sleep. Marriage in medieval England was not only love. It was power. Power written in contracts. Power sealed in rings. Power spoken in vows. And like all power, it shaped the world. But tonight, you need only let it go. Let the echoes fade. Let the bells fall silent. And drift into quiet dreams. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. And may the vows of long ago carry you gently into rest.